This instructional video is only to be used as a training aid. It is not intended as a replacement for the operating instructions or repair manuals. Fire hydrant repairs should be performed only by properly trained maintenance personnel. And remember, always use the appropriate safety equipment, always wear eye protection, and always use genuine parts from U.S. Pipe. This training video will illustrate the recommended operation and maintenance procedures for the Sentinel 250 fire hydrant from the U.S. Pipe Valve and Hydrant Division. Designed to meet the needs of the people who maintain and repair it, the Sentinel 250 fire hydrant features fewer bolts than other hydrants, and a simple two-piece traffic coupling that's assembled with just 2 bolts. This allows for quick, economical resetting of the hydrant in the event of traffic damage. Note that operation and maintenance procedures are the same for all hydrant sizes. Let's begin with facing the nozzles. After installation, it may be necessary to rotate the hydrant so the nozzles are pointed in the proper direction, enabling the fire department to easily connect the hydrant to the pumper truck. To accomplish this, first shut off the hydrant's auxiliary valve. Open the main valve 3 turns. Loosen, but do not disassemble the bolts and nuts on the standpipe coupling. This relieves compression between the standpipe sections. Turn the upper standpipe as needed. Then retighten the bolts and nuts on the coupling. Be sure they are drawn up evenly on each side. Close the main valve and then open the auxiliary valve to restore the hydrant to service. The Sentinel 250 fire hydrant was engineered to provide traffic protection and to meet the AWWA standard of 18-inch minimum clearance from the center line of the lowest nozzle to the bury line cast on the lower standpipe. If the hydrant is buried too deeply or the grade is changed after installation, it is recommended that a Sentinel 250 hydrant extension kit be installed. This kit is available in 6-inch increments, from 1/2 foot to 5 feet, and it includes a standpipe extension section, a valve rod extension section, a 2-piece cast extension flange, 8 flange bolts and nuts, a stainless steel extension rod coupling, 2 1/2-inch stainless steel clevis pins, 3 stainless steel cotter pins, 1 standpipe coupling O-ring seal, and a flange gasket. To install the extension, shut off the auxiliary valve for the hydrant. Remove 1 hose cap and open the hydrant 2 or 3 full turns to relieve pressure on the hydrant. Drive out the operating nut locking pin and remove the operating nut, making sure not to lose the operating nut seal, which is up inside the operating nut. Using a small Allen wrench, loosen the hold-down nut screw. Loosen the hold-down nut using a combination spanner wrench and turning the nut counterclockwise. Remove the hold-down nut. Using the combination wrench socket, remove the travel stop nut. Loosen the revolving nut, turning in the operating direction of the hydrant. Remove the revolving nut and anti-friction washer as a unit. It is not necessary to remove the bonnet. Remove the standpipe traffic coupling and lift the upper standpipe straight up and off the valve rod. Remove the upper valve rod and traffic rod coupling as a unit by removing the lower stainless steel cotter pin and stainless steel clevis pin. Using parts from the kit, secure the extension rod coupling onto the end of the extension rod. Secure this assembly onto the lower valve rod with the other clevis pin and cotter pin from the kit, making sure the flange gasket is in place. Attach the extension standpipe section to the lower standpipe, using the 2 flange halves and bolts. Assemble the upper valve rod, with the traffic rod coupling already attached, onto the extension rod, and retain it with the original clevis pin and a cotter pin from the kit. Make sure the traffic rod coupling is installed with the words "this end up" properly oriented. Place the new standpipe coupling seal in the groove in the bottom of the upper standpipe. Use grease or gasket sealant in the groove to hold it in place. Now, lower the upper standpipe with the bonnet still attached over the upper valve rod, taking care to avoid disturbing the 2 O-rings inside the bore of the bonnet. Align the nozzles to face in the proper direction. Reassemble the standpipe traffic coupling, observing the top side markings on the halves to assure correct orientation. Tighten the coupling bolts and nuts, making sure that the spaces between the ends of the 2 halves of the coupling, where the bolts go through, are equal. Re-grease the upper and lower chambers of the revolving nut. Check to be sure the anti-friction bearing is in place. Reinstall the revolving nut by turning it in the hydrant closing direction. Reassemble the travel stop nut and the hold-down nut, and tighten securely. Tighten the hold-down nut screw. Reinstall the operating nut and the operating nut locking pin. Now, make sure the hydrant is closed. Then open the hydrant's auxiliary valve. Open and close the hydrant to assure proper operation. Check for leaks, and then restore the hydrant to service. Traffic damage is a known hazard for any fire hydrant. But the most severe damage can be minimized when the hydrant is a Sentinel 250 fire hydrant. And resetting the hydrant is easy, thanks to a simple design. The U.S. Pipe Traffic Repair Kit consists of a stainless steel traffic rod coupling, stainless steel clevis pins, stainless steel cotter pins, a standpipe coupling seal, standpipe traffic coupling halves, and standpipe traffic coupling bolts and nuts. To reset the hydrant, first remove the operating nut from the bonnet by driving out the operating nut locking pin from the side of the operating nut. Remove the operating nut, making sure not to lose the operating nut seal, which is up inside the operating nut. Using a small Allen wrench, loosen the hold-down nut screw. Loosen the hold-down nut using a combination spanner wrench and turning the nut counterclockwise. Remove the hold-down nut. Using the combination wrench socket, loosen the travel stop nut. Then remove the travel stop nut. Loosen the revolving nut, turning in the operating direction of the hydrant. It is not necessary to separate the anti-friction bearing from the nut. Remove the revolving nut and withdraw the upper valve rod from inside the upper standpipe. To replace the damaged traffic rod coupling, remove the stainless steel cotter pin. Remove the clevis pin and the traffic rod coupling from the upper valve rod and discard them. Assemble the new traffic rod coupling onto the upper valve rod using the new clevis pin and new cotter pin from the kit. The traffic rod coupling must be installed with the words "this end up" properly oriented. Assemble the upper valve rod and the new traffic rod coupling onto the lower valve rod, and retain it with the new clevis pin and new cotter pin from the kit. If remnants of the original standpipe traffic coupling remain on the upper standpipe, remove them and discard all pieces, including the bolts. Install the new standpipe coupling seal into the groove in the bottom of the upper standpipe. Grease or gasket sealant in the groove will help hold it in place. Carefully lower the upper standpipe with the bonnet still attached over the upper valve rod, taking care to avoid disturbing the two O-rings inside the bore of the bonnet. Align the nozzles to face the proper direction. Now assemble the standpipe traffic coupling, observing the top side markings on the coupling halves to assure correct orientation. Tighten the coupling bolts evenly, equalizing space between the coupling halves on each side. Re-grease the upper and lower chambers of the revolving nut. Check to be sure the anti-friction bearing is in place. Reinstall the revolving nut by turning it in the hydrant closing direction. Reinstall the travel stop nut and the hold-down nut, and tighten securely. Tighten the hold-down nut screw. Then reinstall the operating nut and pin. Open and close the hydrant to assure proper operation. Check for leaks, and return the hydrant to service. The Sentinel 250 main valve repair kit includes one seat ring, one top seat O-ring marked with a white dot, one bottom seat O-ring, and one reversible main valve. To replace the main valve, first shut off the auxiliary valve and make sure there is no water pressure on the hydrant. Remove one hose cap and open the hydrant 2 full turns to relieve pressure on the hydrant. Drive out the operating nut locking pin from the side of the operating nut. Remove the operating nut, taking care not to lose the operating nut seal, which is inside the operating nut. Using a small Allen wrench, loosen the hold-down nut screw, then loosen the hold-down nut with a combination spanner wrench, turning it counterclockwise. Remove the hold-down nut. Remove the travel stop nut. Now, remove the revolving nut, turning it in the opening direction of the hydrant. It is not necessary to separate the anti-friction bearing from the revolving nut. Using a large Allen wrench, loosen and then remove the bonnet locking screw. Using a combination spanner wrench, rotate the bonnet 1/16 of a turn, or 22½ degrees, turning it counterclockwise. The bonnet lugs will disengage. Now lift the bonnet straight up, off of the upper valve rod. The A359-00 seat wrench is used with the Sentinel 250 fire hydrant. It is ductile iron and has both a cast slot and a drilled hole at its base. It also has a support arm that can be adjusted and locked in place by a thumb screw. To remove the main valve, slide the slot of the wrench over the stainless steel pin located just below the brass sleeve on the upper valve rod. Thread the knurled collar onto the upper valve rod to secure the seat wrench in place. Pull up on the seat wrench to make sure the hydrant's main valve is closed. Then lower the support arm and adjust it against the top of the upper standpipe. Tighten the thumb screw. This will support the weight of the wrench and the valve rod and hold the main valve assembly in the closed position. Turn the seat wrench counterclockwise 6 to 7 turns. Remove the knurled collar and remove the wrench. Slip the valve rod and main valve assembly out of the upper standpipe. Remove the lower valve plate, turning it counterclockwise. Use a large screwdriver to carefully pry the main valve off of the lower valve rod. Slide the seat ring off the upper valve plate. Clean, inspect, and replace any damaged parts. The main valve in the Sentinel 250 hydrant is reversible. If the seating surface is damaged, the main valve can be flipped before reassembly to restore its sealing capability. Clean and lubricate the threaded portion of the seat ring and the O-ring seals, and slide the seat ring onto the upper valve plate. Now, either flip or replace the main valve. Reinstall the lower valve plate and tighten it securely. Push the assembly into the closed position and carefully lower the assembly back into the hydrant. Place the wrench back on the valve rod and secure it with the knurled collar. Turn the wrench clockwise until it's snug and apply approximately 150 to 200 foot-pounds of torque. Open the auxiliary gate valve to restore water pressure and hold the main valve closed. Now you are ready to replace the bonnet. Replace the bonnet seal and grease the threads on the valve rod. Replace the bonnet, turning it clockwise into position. Grease the threads on the bonnet locking screw and reinstall it. Be sure the bonnet is centered so that the locking screw sits in the V of the locking slot in the upper standpipe. Re-grease the upper and lower chambers of the revolving nut and install it by turning in the hydrant closing direction. Make sure the anti-friction bearing is in place. Reinstall the travel stop nut and the hold-down nut and tighten securely. Tighten the hold-down nut screw, then reinstall the operating nut and pin. Open the hydrant to check pressure tightness of the assembled parts and verify proper operation of the main valve and drains. Close the hydrant and return it to service. To replace a damaged nozzle, remove the nozzle cap on the nozzle to be replaced. Use a pointed tool and hammer to remove the nozzle locking device. Using a nozzle removal wrench, engage the lugs inside the nozzle. Reinstall the cap loosely to hold the wrench in place. Turn the nozzle clockwise. Lubricate the threads and the O-ring and install the replacement nozzle by threading it in a counterclockwise direction. Install a new nozzle locking device and drive it in place with a hammer and punch. This concludes our training video on the Sentinel 250 fire hydrant, an instructional training aid from U.S. Pipe Valve and Hydrant Division.